Hello and welcome to Frontrunner Motorsport. Some time ago, back at the start of this channel's life, I did a list of every race driver who had competed in both Formula 1 and the British touring cars. Since then, it has been requested I do the same for the Deutsche Tourenwagen Masters, or DTM, and I ignored it for way too long. But as the channel is nearly 5 years old and has over 1,000 subscribers, let's go back to a more innocent time when I was just as inconsistent at releasing videos to an audience of maybe 10 people. This is part 1 of the every driver who raced in Formula 1 and the DTM. It is a much longer list than you would think at first glance, going back to the original DTM, which was known as the DPM, Deutsche Produktionswagen Meisterschaft, in 1984 to the present year 2024. 40 years of history to get through, and so without delay, let's take a look at our first 14 drivers who raced in Formula 1 and DTM. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next part, and let's jump into the video. Volker Wieldler. We are going to start with a bit of a cheat, because whilst Volker Wieldler was indeed briefly involved in Formula 1 with the Real team in 1989, he never actually qualified for a race, failing to qualify in all of his 9 attempts. He was usually 2 to 4 seconds off making it into normal qualifying, and so sadly never came close to starting a Formula 1 race. Elsewhere, he took wins in Japanese F3000 and even won Le Mans in a Mazda alongside Johnny Herbert and Bertrand Gachot in 1991. He was also one of the first to race in both DTM and Formula 1, finishing runner-up in a Mercedes 190E with 2 wins to his name, and then returning in 1989 in a Ford Sierra Cosworth and doing nowhere near as well. Roland Ratzenberger. Whilst Roland Ratzenberger did at least get to start a Formula 1 race, his time in Formula 1 was also tragically short. After failing to qualify for the Brazilian Grand Prix of 1994 for Simtech, Ratzenberger made his one Formula 1 start at the next race in Aida in Japan, finishing 13th. At the next round at Imola, he was sadly killed in qualifying. Whilst he did a few races in British touring cars and Japanese touring cars, Ratzenberger only took part in 2 DTM races in 1989, racing for Helmut Marko's team in a Ford Sierra Cosworth, scoring a single point. Michael Schumacher. It's hard to imagine Michael Schumacher in anything other than a Formula 1 car, but before his long Formula 1 career, he did a race in a few different series, with appearances in sports car racing with Sauber to DTM in a Mercedes, who he had a very strong link with early in his career, which paid off eventually, I guess. Michael Schumacher's time in DTM is nowhere near as memorable as his time in Formula 1. He did 2 races in 1989, failing to finish one before not starting the other, and then 4 more in 1991. His best finish was 14th. Of course, he then made his debut with Jordan in Formula 1, moved Benetton from the midfield to the top, dominated the sport with Ferrari, and ruined everything with 3 years at Mercedes. And after his unfortunate accident, we haven't seen him in public for over a decade. Nicola Larini. The Italian was only a couple of years into his career when he got the chance to race in Formula 1. He was racing for Colony in 1987 when they decided to try Formula 1, and Larini raced in the Spanish Grand Prix, retiring early on, and joining Osella for 1988. After a couple of years of Osella and only 4 races he managed to get to the end of, he moved to Ligier for 1990 and finished a lot more races, outside of the points. His final full season was with the Modena Spa team, and again he failed to qualify or failed to finish a majority of races. Having seemingly given up on Formula 1, Larini won the Italian Touring Car Championship in 1992 and moved to DTM with Alfa Romeo for 1993. He dominated the series, winning 10 races and winning Alfa Romeo's only DTM championship. He scored his first points in Formula 1 with Ferrari in 1994 on a part-time drive, and scored a single point for Sauber in 1995. And continued taking wins in DTM and the International Touring Car Championship until the series folded after 1996. Michael Bartels. Another one who never actually got to race in Formula 1, but did fail to qualify for Lotus 4 times in 1991. Bartels returned to International F3000 and was decent, finishing 4th in 1992 with Krypton Reynard. His dalliances with DTM actually started in 1987, a few years before he was in Formula 1 and at the age of 19, so very young. His one appearance in a Ford Sierra that year would be his only appearance for 7 years, returning to the series in 1994 with Alfa Romeo and taking his only DTM wins in 1995. He raced in the International Touring Cars in 1996, but it wasn't a great season, and Bartels would rejoin the DTM grid in 2000 in the revived DTM for Opel, but whilst he got a few podiums, he was never more than a midfield player. He would be a champion in GT racing and has taken wins in 24-hour races. Gabriele Tarquini, the greatest race driver of all time, bar none. Shut up, he is. Gabriele Tarquini had an understated Formula 1 career that I have covered at length in previous videos. The Cliff Notes version is, great driver, never got the chance in a decent team that he deserved. His time in Formula 1 was spent with Osella, Colony, First, AGS, Fondmetal, and a one-off for Tyrrell, nearing the end of their life. In touring cars, he was a god. 1994 British Champion, 2003 European Champion, 2009 World Champion and 2018 World TCR Champion, with wins in the International Touring Cars, Super Tourenwagen Cup. Sadly, he only made a few appearances in the old DTM back in 1995 for Alfa Romeo, unsurprisingly. He retired from 3 of his 4 entries with a failure to start in the other. He raced in the International Touring Cars in 1996 and did a lot better over a full season. Sadly, the least successful parts of Tarquini's career are his times in DTM and Formula 1. Mika Häkkinen. Another Formula 1 champion to make the list, the Finn Mika Häkkinen won 2 Formula 1 championships for McLaren, the only team he ever raced for in Formula 1 except Lotus, and that barely counts. After finishing his time in Formula 1 and a few years off from motorsport, Häkkinen made a brief return in the DTM, racing for the HWA Mercedes team. He was actually pretty decent, taking 3 wins in 3 seasons and finishing in the top 10 every year with a best 5th overall in 2005. He completely retired from racing after the 2007 DTM season, but has made the occasional reappearance in GT racing, and he has been consistently involved in punditry and analysis ever since. Pedro Lamy. I feel like Pedro Lamy should have had a much better career than he ended up having. Runner-up in the International F3000 in 1993, after winning the German Formula 3 Championship the year before, Lamy never really got given a really good chance in Formula 1. Doing 8 races for Lotus in 1993 and 1994, a half season with Minardi in 1995, scoring his only point. 1996 was his only full season, and it was a disappointing, pointless season with Minardi. Pedro Lamy had some success in sports car racing, winning a couple of Le Mans Series GT championships, as well as the LMP1 class with Peugeot, and he has been a FIA GT champion. His time in DTM was brief and not a whole lot to write home about, racing for Team Rosberg in 2000 and scoring points with a best 4th place. He did a few races in 2001 but left the series thereafter. He's now a FIA commissioner, so might be one of the people to blame for, most things the FIA does. Paul di Resta, one of 2 drivers who got a Formula 1 drive on the back of their performances in the DTM. We'll get to the other at a later date. Also one of very few DTM champions on this list. Di Resta moved to DTM from single-seaters in 2007, and in his first 4 years was devastatingly consistent. 5th, 2nd, 3rd and 1st, with 6 wins and 21 podiums. His connections with Mercedes netted him a drive with the Force India Formula 1 team. His 3 seasons in Formula 1 were pretty good, scoring points on a regular basis for a midfield team in a competitive field, but he was soon without a drive and he returned to DTM in 2014, but was not as competitive for a few seasons. He took a win in 2016 and finished 5th overall, and 3 wins in 2018 was good enough for 3rd overall. But his final season in DTM to date was 2019 with the short-lived Aston Martin efforts. He now races in sports cars and is a pundit for Formula 1. Vitaly Petrov. The first Russian to race in Formula 1 is not exactly Mr. Popular these days. After making some very poorly thought out comments about the LGBT community, Petrov has basically disappeared from public view, although that may have more to do with his father's assassination in 2020 and not wanting to meet a similar fate. He does occasionally make rambling statements about Russia, and F1 is not legitimate without Russia, a country that has had 4 F1 drivers and a handful of Grand Prix in the grand scheme of things. Petrov's Formula 1 career was mediocre at best, with the most notable thing he did was stopping Fernando Alonso and Mark Webber beating Sebastian Vettel in 2010. 2 years with Renault netted 1 podium, and a final year with Caterham netted him a few embarrassing realisations about his career. He did 1 season of DTM in 2014 for Mucker Motorsport, and finished last overall. He's done some sports car racing, but it looks like he's pretty much done in motorsport. Jenson Button. Again, this could be a bit of a cheat. Jenson Button only did 2 races in DTM, and it was as a Super GT driver in the DTM X Super GT event of 2019. He finished 9th and 16th in a Honda. In Formula 1, he has a lot more to fall back on. Whilst initially he was bounced around between Williams, Benetton and Renault, he found a home at BAR Honda, winning his first race in 2006 at Hungary and staying on as Honda took over and then left again. And Brawn had their surprise year, giving Button a championship before some semi-successful years with McLaren and some pretty dire ones when Honda came back. He now runs his own team racing in Extreme E and GT Racing. Button has done NASCAR of late and occasionally appears in various series around the world. Jack Aitken, the newest entry on this list as he has only done 1 season of DTM, last year in 2023 for Ferrari. He did okay, took a win, but only managed 14th overall, never in title contention. He only had 1 race in Formula 1, standing in for George Russell, who was standing in for Lewis Hamilton at Sakhir in 2020. He did fine as a replacement, but he will now forever be known as a one-race wonder. If he does DTM again in 2024, I would expect some improvement. He's by no means bad, but he's doing a lot more sports car racing, so I definitely expect more appearances there. Esteban Ocon. I'd forgotten about Esteban Ocon's brief time in DTM, much like Pierre Gasly's time in Formula E. The French Formula 3 and GP3 champion joined the ART Mercedes team for the 2016 DTM Championship. He wasn't great and only scored 2 points. His time in DTM was cut short when he replaced Indonesian driver Rio Haryanto at Mana for the second half of 2016. He put in some great performances for Force India over the next few years, but lost his drive to Lance Stroll, which is almost as big an insult as you can possibly get in motor racing circles, and sat out 2019. He's returned with the Alpine team, taken his first Formula 1 win, and been as good as the team need him to be, and will probably continue at this level for as long as he's in Formula 1. Bernd Schneider. The greatest legend DTM ever produced is Bernd Schneider. He was picked for a Formula 1 drive by Zack Speed after team owner Eric Zakowski saw him race to 3rd in the 1987 Macau Grand Prix. Zack Speed were only a very small team, not equipped to race in Formula 1 at all, and Schneider struggled to qualify the car for his 2 years with the team. He had a single race with Arrows in 1990 and never scored points. He was, however, much more successful in DTM. He made scattered appearances in the early years from 1986 to 1989 in Ford Sierras and raced part-time for Zack Speed in 1991. From 1992, he was racing for the main Mercedes team, winning his first races and being a title contender for the first time. He finished 3rd in 1992 and 1993, but took his first title in 1995. When DTM returned in 2000, he took the first 2 wins in the new series and the first 2 titles. He'd win 2 more DTM championships in 2004 and 2006 before retiring for good in 2008. He still has more DTM wins than any other driver, with only René Rast currently close to him and still competing. Schneider has come out and done the odd GT race here and there and has had plenty of success in his long motorsport career. Olivier Grilliard. The Frenchman was once a star of the international F3000 scene, taking 2 wins for GBDA in 1988 and finishing runner-up in the championship to Roberto Moreno. Grilliard went on to drive for top-tier Formula 1 teams such as Ligier and Tyrrell. Unfortunately, he raced for them about a decade after they were successful. He joined Ligier in 1989 and scored his only Formula 1 point at the French Grand Prix, but also failed to qualify for 4 races. He moved to Osella in 1990, the final driver to ever race for the team, then to Fondmetal in 1991, as well as a failure to qualify for AGS in their final Grand Prix weekend. His final year in Formula 1 was 4 races, finished with 12 retirements and no points for Tyrrell in 1992. He finished just off the podium at Le Mans a few times, raced in various sports car championships without success, and even had a really average season in America in the kart series. So was his time in DTM any better? No. But it was just 2 races in 1992 for Bigazzi in a BMW M3 at the Nürburgring. He finished 11th and 13th. Juan Pablo Montoya. I didn't even realise Montoya had raced in the DTM. Well, technically it was the International Touring Car Championship of 1996, but that basically was just DTM imploding, so it counts. Again, just 2 races. Juan Pablo Montoya raced in a Mercedes at Silverstone and retired from both races. A couple of years later, he won the International F3000 Championship, followed by the Kart Series in America in 1999, and then the Indy 500 in 2000. He joined Williams in Formula 1 and won 4 races before winning another 3 with McLaren. He's won his class in the Daytona 24 Hours 3 times, the IMSA Championship, he's taken a win in NASCAR, and wins in IndyCar, including another Indy 500. Now he gets to watch his son race in the Junior Formula, and he still races in sports cars himself. Roberto Merhi. Our first driver to race in more than 2 DTM races is Spaniard Roberto Merhi. His time in Formula 1 was brief, just 14 races for Manor in 2015 without scoring points. But he has raced in just about everything. The Formula 3 Euro Series champion of 2011 raced in DTM for 2 years for Mercedes. In 2012 he raced for Person Motorsport, finished second to last with no points, and the team folded at the end of the year. Merhi raced for HWA in 2013 and did at least score points for them, but he was still pretty low down in the standings, 15th with only 4 points finishes. But in his final DTM race to date, he finished second to Timo Glock. Since he left Formula 1, he has raced in everything from Formula E to the Australian S5000 series, and has won just 1 race in the last decade. Manfred Winkelhock. Doing a couple of races in the 1984 Deutschen Produktionswagen Meisterschaft in 1984 might make Manfred Winkelhock the first to do both DTM and Formula 1. This was towards the end of his tragically short career. After grabbing a fair few podiums in European Formula 2, he had a rough time in Formula 1, racing for smaller backmarker teams such as the brand new Arrows team, ATS, a sole appearance for Brabham and Skold Bandit Ram. 1985 was his final season after 2 races in Germany in the DPM. In a BMW 635 CSI for Brunn, he was killed in a sports car race at Motorsport. Joachim Winkelhock. The younger brother of Manfred, Joachim would go on to be one of the most successful touring car drivers of the 90s. He would spend half a season in Formula 1 with AGS, but never qualified for the small German team. Going on to race in the DTM in 1986 and becoming a series regular up to 1992. He took 3 wins for BMW in that time, with his best season being a 6th overall in 1990. He went on to be the British Touring Car Champion in 1993 and Super Tourenwagen Cup winner in 1997. He won 2 Macau Gaia races and the 1999 24 Hours of Le Mans, all with BMW. He rejoined the new DTM in 2000 with Team Holzer Opel and took 1 win that year, but he struggled over the next few years and retired from motorsport after the 2003 DTM season. Markus Winkelhock. Our final Winkelhock for now is Markus Winkelhock, son of Manfred and nephew of Joachim. He of course famously led his only Formula 1 race for Spiker in 2007 at the Nürburgring in Bahrain. He did drop back unfortunately and never drove in Formula 1 ever again. He was just 5 when his father died, but it clearly didn't put him off motorsports. He first raced in DTM in 2004 for Person Mercedes but scored no points. He returned in 2007, this time in an Audi, and scored his first points in 2008. He was always a midfield driver, his best season was 10th in 2009. He returned to the series 17 years after his debut in 2021, doing 2 races in an Audi, and scored no points. Outside of not being very successful in Formula 1 and DTM, he has won numerous GT titles around the world, and still races to this day. Jacques Laffite. The 1975 European Formula 2 champion became synonymous for his time with Ligier in Formula 1. After debuting with Frank Williams in 1974 and nabbing a first podium for the team in 1975, he moved to Ligier in 1976. He stayed with the French team for the next 7 years and took 6 wins for the team before joining the newer Williams team in 1983, returning to Ligier for another season and a half, but having to retire from Formula 1 after injuries sustained in a big crash at Brands Hatch. He began racing touring cars in 1987 in the World Touring Car Championship with Alfa Romeo, but also raced in the European Series for a couple of years. He began his 3-season stint in DTM in 1990 with Bugatti BMW. He took a win and finished 7th overall. He spent the next couple of years in a Mercedes but only nicked a few podiums and ended his full-time career. He turns up occasionally in strange series like the Renault Megane Euro Cup in 2013 and various GT and historic races even as late as 2018. Robert Kubica. The Polish superstar has become a very successful sports car driver in recent years. He's a champion of the European and World Le Mans Series LMP2 class and is now racing in the hypercar class in a Ferrari. He was also a very good Formula 1 driver, winning for BMW Sauber at the Canadian Grand Prix of 2008, and was usually a consistent point scorer for them and Renault until his injury sustained in a rally crash interrupted his career and seemingly ended it. However, he made a much-loved return to Formula 1 in 2019 with Williams and a couple of appearances for Alfa Romeo. He initially returned to rallying in 2013, which was brave, but he also raced in the DTM in 2020 in a Team ART BMW. Not the best season ever, but he did take a podium late on in the season and left to become successful in sports cars. Karl Wendlinger. The Austrian and German Formula 3 champion made his debut in DTM at the age of 21. This was because he was racing for Helmut Marko's team in everything at the time, DTM, German F3 and Macau. In 1990 he did a few races for the Works Mercedes team but didn't score points and was soon racing in Formula 1 with March and eventually the Mercedes powered Sauber team. He scored the odd points finish but was soon only doing part-time seasons and his final F1 race in 1995. After some success in various GT series such as winning the FIA GT Championship in 1999, he returned to DTM in 2002 for Audi, but in his 2 years back he only scored points occasionally and he returned to GT racing, retiring in 2016. Yannick Dalmas. I may have to do a Formula 1 underrated on French driver Yannick Dalmas. He scored no points in Formula 1 and in fact rarely qualified, but when you consider he only raced for duff teams such as Larousse and AGS, it's understandable. Outside of Formula 1, he was a quality driver. He began racing in Formula 1 in 1987 after taking a couple of International F3000 wins in 1987 with Orica. Whilst he never scored points in F1, he put in some decent enough performances for Larousse, finishing 7th and just out of the points a few times. After 2 years of failing to qualify for almost every race for Larousse and AGS, he moved away from Formula 1 after 1990, except for 2 races for Larousse in 1994. Outside of winning the 24 Hours of Le Mans 4 times for Peugeot, Jost Porsche, McLaren and BMW, he also raced in touring cars and the DTM, racing for Jost, Opel in 1995 and 1996. He scored points occasionally but finished 19th in 1995, just ahead of Formula 1 safety car driver Bernd Mailander, and 17th in 1996. He continued racing until the early 2000s. Nicolas Chiesa. The Danish driver accomplished very little on his way up to Formula 1. He had won a British Formula 4 championship and won the odd junior Formula race around the world, but was hardly a success story. But then in 2003 he won the Monaco round of the International F3000 Championship and was signed by Minardi to replace Justin Wilson, who had just jumped to Jaguar. Chiesa partnered Jos Verstappen for 5 races, and he did finish all of them with a best 11th in America. He did 3 DTM races in 2006 with Audi, but his best finish was 16th at Zandvoort. His career pretty much ran its course thereafter, and he quietly disappeared from motorsport. Liam Lawson. Really the man of the moment. Liam Lawson only made his Formula 1 debut in 2023 for AlphaTauri and put in some fantastic performances. He was also a regular winner in Formula 2 and put in a strong challenge for the Super Formula title last year. He spent 1 year in DTM in 2021 and took Ferrari's first DTM wins. 3 wins put him in title contention, but he lost out to Maximilian Goetz after some Mercedes teamwork. Liam Lawson only lost by 3 points and has been a top driver everywhere ever since, with hopefully a bright future in Formula 1 ahead of him. Eric van der Poel. The 1987 DTM champion never won a race in DTM. That's a pretty good stat right there. He was very consistent in his BMW M3 in 1987 and that was enough to win the championship despite never climbing the top step. He'd do the odd DTM race over the next few years, but never ran in the series full time again. In 1990 he finished 2nd in the International F3000 Championship behind Eric Comas and was soon in Formula 1 with Modena Spa for 1991. He failed to qualify for every race bar one, where he almost finished on the podium if he hadn't run out of fuel. He'd spent another year failing to qualify for Brabham, and he did a few races for Fon Metal, but switched back to touring cars, having a poor half season in the British touring cars, but taking wins in Spain and a class win at Le Mans. David Coulthard. Our final driver for today is the Scottish bin with the chin, David Coulthard. Despite a couple of average seasons in International F3000, he was hired by Williams and eventually made his way into Formula 1. He took 5 wins in 1995 for the team but switched to McLaren in 1996, spending the next 8 years with the team and finishing runner-up to Michael Schumacher in 2001. He joined Red Bull and stayed with the team in their infancy until 2008, when he swapped out for Sebastian Vettel. Before retiring from racing completely, Coulthard raced in DTM for 3 years for Mercedes, scoring 1 point in 2010, 1 point in 2011 and 14 points in 2012. He only scored points in 4 races over 3 years, finishing 16th, 16th and 15th. He really should have given up after Formula 1. Emmanuel Pirro. It's a shame Formula 1 never worked out for the Italian because he is a sports car superstar. He was a very capable single-seater racer, finishing 3rd in the first 2 editions of the International F3000 Championship for Onyx Racing in 1985 and 1986. In 1987 he became a test driver for McLaren during the Prost and Senna era. He bided his time in Japan and in touring cars and helped develop the Honda engine for McLaren, but he never raced in Formula 1 with the Woking-based team, instead making his debut for Benetton in 1989 in place of the injured Johnny Herbert. He would score 2 points for his best Formula 1 finish, a 5th in Australia. In 1990 he moved to BMS Scuderia Italia and spent the next 2 years struggling at the back with them, taking just 1 points finish. During the 1990 season he won on his DTM debut at the Nürburgring for Team Schnitzer and returned in 1992, taking a few podiums. 12 years later he raced in the DTM again, this time in an Audi, but he couldn't match his earlier successes and left to win just about everything in sports car and touring car racing. JJ Leto. The Finn won the 1988 British Formula 3 Championship ahead of future Formula 1 champion Damon Hill and future Formula 1 race winner Eddie Irvine, amongst other star names. Leto even tested for Ferrari in Formula 1, but instead made his debut the other end of the grid with Onyx, replacing Bertrand Gachot. In 1991 he partnered Pirro at Scuderia Italia and scored a miraculous podium, his best result in Formula 1. He stayed with the team for 1992, but it was a disappointing season, so Leto moved to the new Sauber team for 1993 and scored points early on, but the season soon tailed off. He had his final drives in Formula 1 with Benetton in 1994, but a pre-season crash saw him injured and he missed races, with Jos Verstappen taking his place. Benetton ditched him and Leto finished his time in Formula 1 with Sauber. He moved to DTM for the 1995 season in an Opel. He put in several good performances but never won a race. His best year was 1996 in the International Touring Cars for Keke Rosberg's Opel team. He scored several podiums and finished 5th overall. He did 2 more races in the new DTM in 2002 and has also won the 24 Hours of Le Mans and the American Le Mans Series. Alex Zanardi. One of the unluckiest men to ever exist, and I'm not talking about his racing career. After finishing runner-up to Christian Fittipaldi in the 1991 International F3000 Series, Zanardi ended the year in Formula 1, doing a few races for the brand new Jordan team, before a single race for Minardi in 1992. He got his first almost full Formula 1 season in 1993 with Lotus, taking his only point in Brazil, before not scoring points with Lotus in their final year in Formula 1. Zanardi went off to America and won the kart series twice, before returning to Formula 1 for one final try with Williams, and again failing to score points for that team also, a team that in recent history had been top of the pile. He briefly returned to America before losing his legs in a horrifying crash in Germany. He made a miraculous return to motorsport and even took wins in the World Touring Cars, whilst also becoming a Paralympic gold medalist in hand cycling. In 2018 he took part in the only 2 DTM races he would ever compete in, finishing in 5th place in a BMW at Misano. In the year since, he was placed into a coma after a cycling accident in 2020, and in 2022 his house burnt down. He now lives in fear of being cursed. Pascal Wehrlein. A couple of videos ago I mentioned Paul di Resta was one of 2 drivers to get a Formula 1 drive off the back of their DTM performances. Well, the other driver was Pascal Wehrlein. The German was just 19 when he made his first DTM start in 2013 for Mucker Motorsports. In 2014 he took his first win in DTM at Verlausitz-Ring, and in 2015 he won the DTM Championship at just 21 years of age. He moved to Formula 1 in 2016 with Manor and scored his first point at Austria, the only point for Manor in their final year in Formula 1. He moved to Sauber in 2017 and scored a couple more points finishes, but couldn't secure a future in Formula 1 and moved back to DTM for a single season in 2018. He couldn't match his earlier performances and has spent the time since in Formula E, first with Mahindra and then leading Porsche's Challenge, where in the last couple of years he has become a real title contender with 5 Formula E wins. Alan Berg. The Canadian was lucky enough to race against Ayrton Senna and Martin Brundle during the 1983 British Formula 3 season and even took a race win. I mean, technically he finished 10th in the race, and Brundle and Senna were racing in the European class and not the British, but technically Alan Berg won a round of the British Formula 3 in 1983, from a certain point of view. He stayed on for 1984, racing for Eddie Jordan, and finished 2nd overall, but a lack of funding meant no Formula 1 drive for Berg in 1985, despite testing for several teams including Tyrrell. He returned to Canada for 1985 and essentially had a year off. He managed to get the money together for half a Formula 1 season with Osella, which yielded a best finish of 12th in the German Grand Prix. After that, Berg's career was kind of sporadic, but he did race in the DTM in 1991. He raced for Tauber Motorsport in a BMW M3 and had a best result of 8th. After he struggled on for a while, but he finally retired after 2001. Johnny Giacotto. In 1975, Venezuelan Johnny Giacotto was a 350cc world motorbike champion. A couple of decades later, and he was a star of touring car racing in Europe. The multi-talented Giacotto switched to car racing in the early 80s, taking a couple of wins in European Formula 2 in 1982 for March. He finished 2nd in the championship behind Corrado Fabi, losing out by a single point. He debuted in Formula 1 a year later for Theodore Racing Team and scored his only Formula 1 point at Long Beach, which was more than his Colombian teammate Roberto Guerrero scored. In 1984 he did half a season for Tolman, but scored no points and broke both his legs in a crash, ending his single-seater career. He switched to touring cars, taking wins initially in the European and World Touring Car Series, before moving to DTM in 1988. He was successful immediately, taking 4 wins for Mercedes and finishing 6th overall. He switched to BMW for 1989 and continued to win races, finishing 2nd overall in 1990 behind Hans-Joachim Stuck. He'd finished 4th overall in 1991 and 1992, ending his run in DTM with 14 wins. He went on to win the Super Tourenwagen Cup twice and have successes in Italy but not Britain. He returned for 2 DTM races in an Opel in 2002 and has since retired from motorsport to watch his sons not really find any success. Johnny Jr. won races in GP2, and Jonathan was a race winner in Lamborghini Super Trofeo, but neither matched their father's glory days. Giorgio Francia. Yet another who didn't technically race in Formula 1, Giorgio Francia failed to qualify for Brabham in 1977 and Osella in 1981, but he was a Works Alfa Romeo mainstay for many years and had successful runs in both touring cars and sports cars. He came close to winning the Italian Touring Car Championship several times, as well as winning races in Spain. He raced in the DTM back in 1993 and 1994 for the Schubel engineering team in an Alfa Romeo 155. Francia managed to get a total of 7 podiums, but never the top step. Good enough for 7th in the championship in 1993. He retired from motorsport a couple of years later. Aguri Suzuki. It took Aguri Suzuki 9 attempts to win the Japanese F3000 Championship, finally winning it in 1988 after previously finishing runner-up 3 times. He was also a Japanese touring car champion. But outside of a few appearances at Le Mans and a couple in the International F3000 series, he didn't race much in World Motorsport until he raced in Formula 1. After racing in Japan for LaRousse in 1988, Suzuki joined Zack Speed for 1989, and it was a terrible debut season. Aguri Suzuki failed to qualify for every race as Zack Speed died a death. Suzuki spent the next 2 years with LaRousse and even took a famous podium at his home Grand Prix in 1990. He'd spent 2 years with the Footwork team, formerly Arrows, and made a few substitute appearances for Jordan in 1994 and Ligier in 1995. He'd finished 3rd at Le Mans in 1998, raced in Super GT back in Japan until his retirement in 2000, started his own Formula 1 team briefly, Super Aguri in 2006. So when did he race in DTM? Well, he did 1 international touring car race in 1996, finishing 11th before not starting the 2nd race. Christian Klein. One of Red Bull's original drivers in Formula 1, Christian Klein raced for Jaguar first in 2004 before staying on with Red Bull for the next couple of years, sharing a drive with Antonio Liuzzi. He'd spent a year as a test driver for Honda and returned to Formula 1 for a couple of races with HRT in 2010. But that 2004 season with Jaguar would turn out to be his only full season. Same in DTM, he has the honour of being the first driver to race a McLaren in the DTM, and so far only, but that is set to change in 2024. He had a best finish of 5th in the 6 races he competed. Other than that, he has had a fairly average career of sports car and GT racing, still taking occasional wins in the Pro-Am class of the GT World Challenge. Gianfranco Brancatelli. The Italian also did not qualify for a Formula 1 race, failing to qualify for the 3 he entered with the very small Willie Carlson team and Team Mazzerio. He was a touring car ace, however, winning the 1985 European Touring Car Championship in a Volvo and the Macau Gaia race that same year. He was Italian champion in 1988 and he won the Spa 24 Hours in 1989. He took part in one season of DTM in 1989 for the Eggenberger Ford team in a Sierra RS500 Cosworth. He usually finished around the top 10, but he did take one podium. He had a few goes at Le Mans and the Bathurst 1000, and he started to compete less as the 90s rolled on, but he does still occasionally turn up in historic racing. Keke Rosberg. The 1982 Formula 1 champion would be a major part of DTM's history, as both a racer and a team owner for many years. It took a while for him to find success in Formula 1 racing for Theodore Racing, ATS and the Fittipaldi team, before finally joining Williams and winning the championship, and retiring after a single season with McLaren in 1986. After he retired from F1, he did a season of World Sports Cars with Peugeot in 1991, and then raced in the DTM, first for Mercedes where he had his best season, taking his only DTM win and finishing 5th overall. He spent 1994 and 1995 with Opel, but had a lot less success. He retired from racing, beginning Team Rosberg, which had raced in the new TDM from 2000 with Mercedes and eventually Audi. He has managed the careers of some of Finland's best drivers, such as JJ Lehto, Mika Hakkinen and his own son Nico. Pietro Fittipaldi. The grandson of the legendary Emerson Fittipaldi, Pietro is one of the many current young generation of Fittipaldis racing. He has been a Haas reserve driver for the last 5 years and still is in 2024. He took part in 2 Grand Prix for the American team in place of Romain Grosjean after his fireball crash in 2020. The year before, Pietro Fittipaldi had an unremarkable year in DTM in an Audi, scoring some points but only finishing 15th overall. He has raced all over the world, from Super Formula in Japan to his current home in IndyCar for Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing. He is still only 27 and still has every chance of making it into Formula 1 in the next few years. Christian Fittipaldi. The cousin of Pietro Fittipaldi and nephew of Emerson, son of Wilson. God, a lot of Fittipaldis have raced in Formula 1. That's not to mention Max Papis, who has married a Fittipaldi and also raced in Formula 1. We've got Enzo and Emerson Jr. still to try their hand at Formula 1 yet. The 1991 International F3000 champion raced for Minardi in 1992 and 1993, and for Footwork in 1994. He scored some points, a very underrated driver, but he never got given a chance with a bigger team. He switched to the kart series in 1995 and took a couple of wins in his 8 years in the series. He'd go on to win several 24 Hours of Daytona and a couple of IMSA championships. He's had a lot of success in America, but sadly, Formula 1 just never worked out for him. Christian Albers. Our final driver on today's list is the Dutchman Christian Albers, still to this day the most successful Dutchman in DTM history. Max Verstappen in Formula 1, Christian Albers in DTM. They're basically the same. Christian Albers only won 13 races in his entire career, and Max does that every few months. The 1999 German Formula 3 champion joined Mercedes in DTM in 2001 for Persson Motorsport, and despite a tough year, he got a second place at the Sachsenring. After another difficult year with Team Rosberg, Albers moved to the HWA Mercedes and became a real title contender. He took his first win at Adria and finished runner-up in the championship to Bernd Schneider, only losing out by 4 points after a poor final race. In 2004, he finished 3rd overall and took his 5th and final DTM win and moved to Formula 1 in 2005 with Minardi. He scored his only points at the disastrous US Grand Prix when he finished 5th of 6 cars. Albers raced for Midland and Spiker before going back to DTM for 2008 in an Audi, but he scored no points after a few sports car races. He retired from racing in 2012. He was team principal at Caterham in their final Formula 1 year and is now a TV pundit. Heinz Harald Frentzen. In 1989, Heinz Harald Frentzen tied on points with Michael Schumacher in the German F3 Championship. They finished 2nd and 3rd behind Karl Wendlinger. While Schumacher went on to have the career he had, Frontrunner would join Wendlinger at Sauber in 1994, but his time in Formula 1 was longer and way more successful. After 3 years with Sauber, he would go on to finish second in a Williams in 1997 and third in a Jordan in 1999, with 3 Formula 1 wins to his name. Sadly, as the new millennium took hold, Frontrunner would drop down the grid with Jordan, find himself at a dying Arrows team, and finish his time in Formula 1 back at Sauber. He joined DTM the year after in 2004, spending 2 years in an Opel and 1 in an Audi. He scored a few podiums, but no wins. He was meant to race in the old DTM in 1993, but for whatever reason is listed as a did not start at the final 2 races at Hockenheim. Hans-Joachim Stuck. One of the earliest DTM entries on this list. In fact, he may possibly be the earliest. He even raced in the Deutsche Rennsport Meisterschaft, a sort of predecessor to DTM. Stuck was a capable Formula 1 driver who never really achieved any success. He raced for March from 1974 to 1976, then Brabham, where he got his best results in 1977, before finishing out his time with Shadow and ATS. More well known for his success in sports car racing, which include 2 Le Mans wins and 7 podiums, as well as a sports car championship in 1985. He first raced in DTM in the inaugural season in 1984, but returned in 1990 with Audi and won the championship. He finished 3rd overall in 1991 and did half a season in 1992. He did a few races in the DTM Classic Series in 2022, 53 years after his motorsport debut. Michele Alboreto. It's a shame Michele Alboreto is no longer with us. He joined Tyrrell in Formula 1 in 1981 and took the famous team's final Formula 1 wins, before getting a drive with Ferrari for the next 5 years. He finished runner-up in 1985 and took 3 wins for the Scuderia. His final few years are spent with Tyrrell again, LaRousse, Footwork, BMS Scuderia Italia, and finally Minardi in 1994. A year later he raced in an Alfa Romeo in the DTM and only managed to finish in the points once. He would go on to have success in sports cars before his untimely death. Naoki Hattori. Talk about the highs and lows of motorsport. In 1990, Naoki Hattori won the Japanese Formula 3 Championship. In 1991, he failed to qualify for 2 Formula 1 races for Coloni, and that was his entire Formula 1 career. He went back to racing in Japan, taking regular wins in Formula Nippon and winning the Japanese Touring Car Championship twice in different classes. He also raced in America for a couple of years and raced in the DTM in 1996. Well, he did 2 races in the International Touring Cars in 1996. Jan Magnussen. And now for a more successful Formula 1 and DTM career, and it's not often you can say that about Jan Magnussen. The 1994 British F3 champion made his F1 debut with McLaren, stepping in for Mika Häkkinen, and then spent a year and a half with the Stewart team, only ever scoring a single point. It was in his pre-F1 days that he raced in the DTM for Mercedes in 1995, and he was actually pretty good, finishing 2nd at the Alemanring and 8th overall. He won races in the International Touring Cars, finishing runner-up in 1995 and 10th overall in 1996, and he is now an experienced GT racer. Jochen Mass. Another sports car supremo, but Jochen Mass was also a Formula 1 race winner. After retiring from 10 races out of 13 with Surtees in 1973 and 1974, he joined McLaren and won the 1975 Spanish Grand Prix, taking 8 podiums in 3 years and playing backup to Emerson Fittipaldi. He later raced for ATS, Arrows and March, and has won at Le Mans. He was the final Deutsche Rennsport Meisterschaft champion in 1985, and he did a few DTM races in 1991 for Mercedes, but never competed in the series full time. The man was still racing historics in his mid-70s. Ricardo Zonta. The Brazilian won the 1997 International F3000 Championship and was teammate to Jacques Villeneuve at the new BAR team in 1999. He stayed for 2000, but the team's first couple of years were very much learning years, and he only scored a few points. He made a few substitute appearances, first for Jordan in 2001 and then Toyota in 2004. He raced in 2 International Touring Car Championship races in 1996 for Mercedes and has been racing in Brazil for the last 17 years and still is in 2024. Stefano Modena. A great driver who never really got a stroke of luck in his Formula 1 career, and Stefano Modena is a lot better than the results he got. He had a dreadful season with Eurobrun in 1988, spent a couple of years struggling with reliability at Brabham, really shined in the first half of 1991 with Tyrrell, before spending his last season with Jordan, leaving Formula 1 with the sour taste of disappointment on his tongue. He made a few appearances in DTM in 1994 for Alfa Romeo, winning his first 2 starts at Avis, his only DTM wins. He raced in DTM and the International Touring Cars in 1995 and 1996, and even returned in an Opel in 2000, not with any real success. He retired from motorsport shortly after. Timo Glock made his start in Formula 1 all the way back in 2004 with Jordan. He didn't get a full-time seat until 2008 with Toyota. Whilst he got a couple of podiums, he didn't really have any real success, and he spent the next 3 years with the Virgin Marussia Manor team at the back of the field, and left Formula 1 to race in the DTM with BMW. He took 5 wins in his 7 years, but never finished higher than 5th in the championship, which he did twice in 2018 and 2020. In 2021, he finished 17th, and that was his final full season, making a couple of appearances in 2022. Christian Danner. The German would be involved in Formula 1 as late as 2007, but began his time with Zakspeed in 1985 after winning the International F3000 Championship. He'd raced for Osella and Arrows in 1986, taking his first point, and rejoined Zakspeed in 1987 for an absolutely dire season. His final season was with Real, and finished 4th in Phoenix for his best Formula 1 result. The year between his seasons with Zakspeed and Real was spent in the DTM, winning 2 races in his Alpina BMW M3. The next few years were spent with part-time DTM drives, returning to the season full-time in 1993. He'd spent the next few years with Alfa Romeo, taking a couple of wins in 1995. Amazingly, he returned to Formula 1 with Jaguar in 2001 as a test driver, and 2007 with Super Aguri. Alexander Wurz. 1996 and 1997 were exciting times in the Wurz household. In 1996, he raced in the International Touring Car Championship in an Opel, scoring regular points but nothing outstanding. He also happened to win for 24 Hours of Le Mans for the first time, and in 1997, he made his Formula 1 debut with Benetton. He had an exciting few years, big crashes and a podium. He stayed with Benetton as they drifted down the grid until 2000. He made an appearance for McLaren in 2005 and raced a full season for Williams in 2007. He has since won at Le Mans for a second time and taken a few wins with Toyota in the World Endurance Championship. His son is now on the path to Formula 1. Alessandro Nannini. The younger brother of Italian singer Gianna Nannini, Alessandro Nannini formed a long relationship with Minardi, firstly in European Formula 2 and then Formula 1 in 1986. Despite spending 2 seasons with the Italian backmarkers, Nannini never scored points for Minardi and moved to Benetton for 1988. With Benetton, he became a top driver, taking several podiums and finishing in the top 10 in the next 3 years, taking his only Formula 1 win at the 1989 Japanese Grand Prix. Sadly, he was involved in a helicopter crash, which ended his time in Formula 1 and cut him down in his prime. He carried on racing for a few years, including in the DTM, taking wins with Alfa Romeo, finishing 4th overall in 1994 and 3rd overall in 1996. He raced almost entirely for Italian teams, except for a few appearances in Porsches and Mercedes. Giancarlo Fisichella. A real steady hand for a lot of Formula 1 teams, Fisichella managed to survive in Formula 1 for 14 years. He made his DTM appearances before his Formula 1 career, racing for Alfa Romeo in 1995 and 1996, getting several podiums and finishing 6th overall in 1996. He started his time in Formula 1 with Minardi, but quickly went on to Jordan, and then Benetton, and then back to Jordan. He took a shock win at Brazil in 2003, the final Jordan win in Formula 1, and spent time with Sauber, then Renault, helping them win the Constructors' title alongside champion Fernando Alonso. He finished up his time in Formula 1 with Force India, and then stepping in for a last few races for Ferrari. A dream move for any Italian. He has since gone on to various sports car and GT successes. Dieter Quester. It shouldn't be a surprise that the long-time BMW employee raced for BMW in the German Touring Car Series. Dieter Quester had a single Formula 1 race with Surtees and then went on to race in almost everything else, almost always in a BMW. He raced in the DTM between 1988 and 1991, always in a BMW, and he took a few podiums and regularly scored points. He has since retired from racing in 2018 at the young age of 79. Alex Albon. Alex Albon never deserved to get turfed out of Formula 1 in the first place, but it did mean he got to spend a season in the DTM. He took a win in the AlphaTauri sponsored Ferrari and finished 6th overall. His time in Formula 1 prior to that DTM drive was with AlphaTauri and Red Bull, but since his single season in DTM, he has returned to Formula 1 with Williams and become hot property, with many teams expressing an interest in his services. His 27 points for Williams in 2023 is the most for any Williams driver since 2017, and the son of former BTCC privateer Nigel Albon looks to have a bright future in the sport. Ralf Schumacher. One of the many Schumachers to race in the DTM. Just wait for Mick to get a drive, because Michael, Ralph and David have all had DTM seats. Ralf Schumacher began his time in Formula 1 with Jordan, taking a few podiums before a successful run with Williams that saw 6 wins in 6 years. He left Williams for Toyota and stayed with the Japanese team until 2007, finishing between 4th and 6th in the championship every year between 1999 and 2003. He also finished 6th in the championship for Toyota in 2005. After leaving Formula 1 behind, Ralf Schumacher would spend the next 5 years in the DTM with Mercedes, but he did not find it easy, never winning a race and having to settle for a few podiums. He retired from racing after finishing 17th overall in 2012. Jean Alesi. Our final driver is French legend Jean Alesi. He was a shining light for Tyrrell in 1989, earning a full drive for 1990. He got a couple of podiums and would be the final Tyrrell driver to score more than 10 points in a season for the once great British team. He got a big move to Ferrari for 1991, although Ferrari were not in a good place at the time. Alesi would stay with the Scuderia until after the 1995 season, taking his only Formula 1 win. In 1996 he raced for Benetton and would get his best championship finishes, 4th place in 1996 and 1997. After that he started to slip further down the field, first with Sauber, then the disastrous Prost team, and finally a few races for Jordan at the end of 2001. He then raced in DTM in 2002, taking his first win at Donington Park, and would go on to take 5 wins in his 5 DTM seasons, finishing in the top 5 in 2002 and 2003. He has since retired from motorsport, never accomplishing what he should have in his motorsport career. So they were the last 17 drivers we have looked at to have raced in both Formula 1 and the DTM. Who were your favourites? Any future drivers who might come from the DTM to Formula 1? Or will any former Formula 1 drivers make a start in DTM in the near future? Let me know in the comments below. Make sure you subscribe to the channel for more motorsport content, including Formula 1 reviews, predictions, car wars and one race wonders. Thank you very much for watching and have a good one.